It is a pretty rare occurrence for a steel coaster to be redone. Unlike wood coasters, steel is really expensive and requires a lot less maintenance. Because of this, steel coasters can last for decades without having any major operational problems. So when they start to get old and no longer enjoyable for everyone, what do you do with them? Well, you scrap them and build something bigger and better, because in most cases, it is only slightly more money to get a brand new original coaster. Additionally, pouring millions into retracking an old steel coaster that already wasn't that popular is not going to turn it around. It will still remain whatever it used to be. But in more recent years, we have seen steel coasters getting redone. We are in the era where the first steel coasters to exist are starting to retire, which is a very interesting time because the question of what is going to happen to them arises. Coasters like Loch Ness Monster and Nemesis have crazy legacies to continue, so retracking them makes a lot more sense. Another common example of a steel coaster being redone is Hulk at Universal Studios Islands of Adventure. This took a classic Universal attraction that was getting to a bad point and turned it around back into a fan favorite. So in today's video, we're going to look at possible contenders for a retracking or a remodel. We have 10 coasters to cover, so let's just jump straight into the video. First off on our list is the one and only Canobie Coaster. This is a very obvious and a very easy pick for me. California Screamin' was my first everything, my first launch, my first inversion, and my first extreme coaster, if you even want to call it that, so it holds a special place in my heart. As much as I want to like this coaster these days, I just can't. I now know what a good coaster actually looks like, and Canobie Coaster is just not it. I honestly don't mind the Incredibles retheming as much as other people do. It is only a slight downgrade, but back to the state of the coaster though. And Canobie Coaster has just been getting so rough for me, and my most recent rides were just so incredibly mid. I even have a ride without onboard audio, and that removed the one good thing about this coaster. Despite my negative reviews, Canobie Coaster remains one of the most popular coasters at the resort, probably because it is the biggest and the baddest there. The line is always pretty long, but the operations on this coaster might single-handedly be the best in the world, so I think Canobie Coaster would make a great candidate for a complete retrack. It is so rough and could use brand new track badly. The loop is by far the worst part of the ride, and Disney knows this. They retrack the loop every 5 years. They just did like a few months ago, and they do it really fast as well. It takes 10 days of downtimes, which amazes me. I just think Canobie Coaster needs to go down for one whole operational season and just work the track from start to finish though, because a family coaster like this shouldn't have this bad of a rattle, and it is Disney. They have infinite money. Also, while they are at it, they can add more theming elements, because it really suffers in this category. Maybe enclosing the valleys and the final helix, if you even want to call it that, could result in some cool additions to spice up this coaster. Anyways, when I think of coasters that need to be redone, Canobie Coaster definitely comes first to mind. Up next are two B&M inverts that I really think could be possible contenders for a traditional retrack in the style of Nemesis. Batman the Ride at Six Flags Great America was the very first B&M invert to open in the world, and you probably can't tell. Nevertheless, going 30 years while still holding strong is definitely an amazing compliment to B&M. When the time comes though, I think this could be a great candidate. Although it is at a Six Flags park, this ride is very popular and it is a clear innovator in the coaster world. It has this historic significance, so I think Six Flags would be willing to do it. The layout is also pretty short, so I don't think it would be that costly. The other invert that I think will eventually get this treatment is Montu at Busch Gardens Tampa. When talking about this park, and honestly this topic in general, a lot of people bring up Kumba, and yeah, it is reaching the end of its service life, and unfortunately it will be the end of its service life. Montu is so much more popular than Kumba and has much better location inside the park. I also think Kumba is replaceable and not a lot of people will care. While when trying to replace something like Montu, it would be almost impossible to come up with something better in a similar style. The construction of Phoenix Rising doesn't really help Montu's case, but I still think when the time comes, Busch Gardens Tampa will know what to do. Next up is Schwarzkopf's favorite coaster, Liseberg Bahnen. This was the first Zero Schwarzkopf collab, and it is a historic family coaster. It has become the icon of Liseberg, and it sits on a really specific plot of land that would make it hard to be replaced. Like some other rides at Liseberg, this coaster navigates a relatively large hill, so I think you would just struggle to find a better replacement, especially because it is so iconic. I think this will eventually be retracked pretty much the entire way, and probably given new trains as well. This is something that will happen much later down the timeline though, because this coaster has been tracking really well after 35 years of operation, but you know, nothing is forever, and I think Liseberg will continue on this coaster's legacy. Next up is Guderick's at Park Asterix. Now a lot of you may be laughing at this decision because Guderick's is one of the worst coasters out there. It theoretically is a good ride, but it is one of the roughest pieces of garbage in the world. So why the hell would it get retracked? Well, two reasons. The first is that this plot of land is very specific to Guderick's. It goes right over the water, which makes it very unique, but also makes it very hard to replace. The second reason is we have seen something done in a very similar style already with Python and Efteling. This was the Vekoma MK that got new trains and a retrack, and it worked pretty well. I think Guderick's could get the same treatment that Python did and receive a retrack and a new set of trains. If the coaster can just be smoothed out a little, it would be one of the most intense and enjoyable rides out there. Another old looper that I can see getting a retrack is Corkscrew at Silverwood. This is the first looping coaster to grace our planet, and because of that, I think it will live on in some way. It already survived a relocation from Knott, so I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. The layout is also very short, so it won't be crazy expensive to retrack. However, the retracking will have to be some kind of specialty track to try and keep the aero feel while still refurbishing and smoothing out the ride. Next up is the one and only Twisted Typhoon. We know that SLCs can be retracked for a fairly cheap price. We have seen this with Great Nor'eastern, and that was a hit success. Wild Adventures is not getting to get anything anytime soon, so I think they're going to milk their coasters as much as they possibly can and get as much as they can out of them. For that reason, I feel like they could turn this abomination of a coaster into a crowd favorite and the most popular coaster in the park. It worked really well with Great Nor'eastern, and I think it would work really well with Twisted Typhoon. Back to B&M inverts, Raptor could be a good candidate. A B&M invert fits so well in Cedar Point's lineup, so replacing the coaster would be really hard to do. Raptor is also a very popular ride in the park, so it makes sense to uphold its legacy. This coaster is also the same age as Nemesis, so it is definitely getting up there in terms of age, and I think Cedar Point can really justify a retrack here, especially because it is their flagship park. So I think giving Raptor the Nemesis treatment without the theming could be a great way to keep Raptor operating for another 30 or so years. Another B&M invert that would be really interesting to retrack is Galactica at Alton Towers. This was the first B&M flyer, as many of you know, and now here's why I think it is more likely than it sounds. We know that Alton Towers is not scared to redo their coasters. They did it with Nemesis, and I think they are willing to do it with almost all their rides. Oblivion would be a solid contender, except retracking the Valley of the Drop would be very hard. You would have to redig out the ground or do something crazy to fit the track that far underground, so I wouldn't say it is off limits, but I would say it is highly improbable. Galactica, on the other hand, would be much easier to retrack, and since we know Alton Towers wants to upkeep their B&Ms, I think Galactica would be a solid contender to be redone. Maybe they could even add some small theming elements like they did with Nemesis. Also, while we are on the topic, I think Smiler is a great contender as well. It is a record-breaking coaster in Alton Towers' prized possession, and it already runs pretty rough, so I think later down the line this is a major possibility. The last coaster we're going to talk about in this video is Accelerator at Knott's Berry Farm. We all know Intamin accelerators struggle to stay operational and aren't exactly known for their reliability. Top Thrill Dragster is a prime example of this, but pretty much all of them have had reliability issues at some point in time. In addition to Top Thrill Dragster getting an LSM launch, we are seeing Senfaziato being refitted with Zamperla trains and given LSMs. This is opening this year as Thunderbolt at Playland, so I think any Intamin accelerator is automatically a good candidate. Accelerator is the first of this model, and it is at one of Cedar Fair's favorite parks, so I think anything is up in the air, especially since Cedar Fair isn't scared to do something like this. So what is likely to happen? I doubt a Zamperla overhaul will happen anytime soon. First of all, a backward spike would be virtually impossible to fit because the Supreme Scream is literally right behind the station. There just is not a lot of room. The only way they could fit in a launch is to heavily modify the layout and change the angle of the launch, so that is not going to happen. I also think LSMs are out of the question. As of right now, Zamperla's LSMs are not strong enough to get Accelerator over the top hat. The acceleration that this coaster demands is pretty crazy, so I think the original launch system has to stay, even though that is the most unreliable part of the ride. Another reason to justify this refurbishment is Accelerator is extremely popular and it gets a lot of wear from year-round operations, so I think it makes a lot of sense. Because Zamperla doesn't really fit the needs of this coaster and a huge remodel isn't really in the question, I think Accelerator will just get a straight retrack from Intamin or something along those lines. So those are 10 coasters that I could see being redone sometime in their operational lifetime. At the end of the day, it really comes down to how much a park is willing to preserve a coaster's legacy and whether people would enjoy a refurbishment. We have seen it happen many times in the past, and I am really curious to see whether these predictions are any accurate. That is all for today's video, guys. Let me know if you agree with my decisions down in the comment section below. As always, make sure to like and subscribe, join the Discord, link in the description. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.